Hello and happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event on ransomware. So, this is part of a series on the tools and solutions that make up a comprehensive ransomware strategy. Today's focus is on threat hunting. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that come in. The Q&A panel is also the place to just say hello, which a lot of you have been doing already. We love to hear where you're logging in from, and it's also the place to let us know if we can help in the unlikely event that you have any technical issues. So a browser refresh will fix most of those, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for that prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in your handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these expert series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field. But the support of our sponsors makes it possible for us to bring you this content, so we want to give a special out to those sponsors. So over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today, and they'll refer to links that you can find in the handout section of your console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handout section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media links, so feel free to check those out. So before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors and a pro tip. A couple of these slides, like this first one, will have a QR code. So if you'd like to get your information that way, have those phones ready. So this ransomware event is supported by Commvault. Disaster recovery testing is not enough. You can achieve cyber resilience with proactive cyber recovery to reduce recovery time in the face of advanced cyber threats. Learn how to go beyond disaster recovery with Commvault's new ebook on why you need a different strategy when cyber attacks strike. Find out more with the QR code on your screen or the Commvault link in your handouts. We're supported by Duo. Cisco Duo protects against breaches with a leading access management suite that provides strong, multi-layered defenses and innovative capabilities that allow legitimate users in and keep bad actors out. A trusted partner to more than 4,000 customers globally, Duo quickly enables strong security while also improving user productivity. You can try it for free at duo.com or at the link in your handouts. Today's event is also sponsored by Rubrik. Keep your data secure, monitored, and accessible everywhere it lives so you can bounce back fast. Click on the link here or in your handouts to start crafting your own cyber recovery blueprint. And finally, this event is also brought to you by SentinelOne. SentinelOne's Singularity Endpoint is one intelligent platform for superior visibility and enterprise-wide prevention, detection, and response across your attack surface from endpoints and servers to mobile devices. It delivers unparalleled endpoint protection and detection with broad visibility, rapid response times, and minimal incident dwell time. It reduces mean time to respond with built-in automation and real-time context and correlation. And it resolves threats with a patented one-click remediation to reverse and roll back all unauthorized changes. So you can learn more about Singularity Endpoint at the QR codes on the right or in the handout section. So once again, take advantage of that handout section where you can find all the links that you've just seen. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic session. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, my favorite source of ransomware information, the Allan Liska. Allan, thanks for taking a break from your work with customers and your constant research into ransomware trends to be here today.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, Scott. Very excited for this. And as always, my favorite part of this is the discussion we have afterwards. So we're going to talk a little bit about threat hunting today and kind of the tools that you can use for that.
All right. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I think I speak for all of us, and we're all looking forward to that. So I'll leave it to you, and I'll be back for Q&A.
All right, sounds good. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the commonly overlooked areas for stopping ransomware intruders. And before I do that, I want to break down how a ransomware attack works. So we're used to talking about a ransomware attack as a single event. Company X got hit by ransomware Y, and that's kind of how we refer to it. But there's actually usually multiple threat actors involved in a ransomware attack. There's the initial access broker, and they're the ones who get access to the network. Then there's the ransomware operator. And in the case of a ransomware as a service operation, there is the person that owns the ransomware as a service operation. So there may be 2 or 3 different threat actors involved in that. And it's important to make sure we understand that distinction, because ransomware isn't just a series of people carrying out attacks. It is a complex ecosystem. It is basically think of it as with the running joke in with Silicon Valley and venture capitalists is everything is Uber for this, right? Well, ransomware is Uber for malware. Everybody is a kind of independent contractor working toward basically making more ransomware for everybody, unfortunately. And so you have the initial access brokers. They're going to use whatever methods, we're going to talk about that in a minute, to gain access. On average, it takes about 79 minutes, according to CrowdStrike, from when the initial access broker gains access to when they have admin control over the network. And that's important because once they have admin control, they can install a beacon, and then that network is ready to be sold to a ransomware operator. Now, if you give everybody in your network local admin access, like unfortunately way too many organizations still do, that 79 minutes is a lot shorter. Because once they have local admin access, it is way easier to get a beacon installed and then put your network up for sale. Once they've secured the network with a beacon calling out, they sell that access, and we see those sales on underground forums like XSS and Ramp and Exploit, what's commonly referred to as the dark web. I don't really like that term, but you get the idea. There are private sales on Telegram and Tox channels, and that can be immediate to weeks depending on the reputation of the initial access broker, where the network is, how big it is, etc. So all of that information is boxed up and put up for sale. And the reason that there are so many initial access brokers now is because there are so many ransomware operators. They know there's a ready market if they've gained access to a network. And then once the affiliate has access, it takes on average about 5 days, according to Sophos, from when the ransomware operator first lands on the network to when they either steal data or encrypt or both. Right now, about 30% of all the attacks that we see are data theft only. So no encryption's involved, just data pilfered from the network. That's up pretty significantly from a few years ago. Ransomware operators don't want to deal with encryption and the mess with cryptors and decryptors, so it's just easier to steal files. Now, it's not always as profitable, but it is easier for them. The caveat to that 5 days that they're in the network on average is, according to Microsoft, once a ransomware operator lands on your network, within 24 hours, they're on the domain controller. And again, once they're on the domain controller, it is so much more difficult to get them out of the network because essentially they have the keys to the kingdom. They can create extra accounts, they can build extra backdoors in, etc. So you have to respond fast to a ransomware attack. Now there are some ransomware operators that break this mold, that they are in a network for months and so on, but you should assume that you have roughly 5 days or less once the ransomware operator touches your network before you have to catch them before the event happens. And so if you break this down, if you like the attack framework, if you break this down, this is how you divide up the operations between what the initial access broker does versus what the ransomware operator does. And I like this as kind of a distinction in activities, because they are carrying out different parts of what is effectively the same operation, but they are still independent actors behaving in different ways with different goals. And that's where threat hunting comes in, because whether you're talking about initial access or you're talking about the ransomware operator, there are ways to detect that activity and stop that activity. And when I'm talking about threat hunting here, I'm not necessarily talking about you have to run out and buy a new thing or buy 5 new things to make it work. A lot of times, if you have an EDR and if you have a SIEM in your network, you have the things that you need to better detect ransomware or initial access broker activity. So SentinelOne, for example, one of our sponsors today, is really great at ferreting out some of this activity if you have the right configuration and right setting. When we talk about initial access broker, using Duo as a way to better isolate against initial access activity can be really important and really valuable. And again, we'll talk about how all of that works, starting with this slide. So this is roughly what a ransomware attack looks like now. And you'll notice, if you've heard me give this talk before, I've been using this graphic for a while because the fundamentals of a ransomware attack hasn't changed. Occasionally I'll add a new tool into the middle section, but the fundamental operations have not changed. Where we see some innovation is on the left-hand side of this graph, where we see more innovation in phishing and credential harvesting, etc. But the basic methodologies are the same. So initial access brokers gain access through primarily 3 ways: phishing campaigns, using existing credentials that are harvested from underground forums, and there are hundreds of millions, if not billions, of leaked credentials available for them. So there are a lot out there. It's why multi-factor authentication is so important. It's not going to solve everything, but it solves a lot. And then exploitation. Vulnerabilities, common vulnerabilities, especially things like SSL VPNs or anything that allows remote access. Those vulnerabilities are exploited very quickly and are and widely gone after by a lot of these ransomware groups. Those are the 3 primary ones. Now, we also see some third party. So that is, ransomware actors or initial access brokers will gain access to a network. They realize that that network is connected to more valuable networks, so they jump over there and they deploy their tools on those other more desirable networks. So we do see some third party. Social engineering is increasingly common, but limited to Western-based ransomware groups. So if you've heard the term scattered spider, that, for example, is one group that focuses on social engineering. And it's pretty simple. They're Western-based, which means a lot of them operate out of the US or UK, and it's a little easier. Let's be honest, if you get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from somebody with a heavy Russian accent asking for your password, you're going to be suspicious. But if it's a British dude, you're going to be a lot less suspicious, maybe. You might not like the British. I don't know. My job's not to tell you who to like and not like. Social engineering is something that you have to worry about, but it is right now limited to Western-based groups. The fact that there are more interest from Western-based cybercriminal groups is a concerning trend, but it's still a relatively small number compared to the other kinds of attacks. And then insider threat, that happens very, 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 very rarely. It's here on the list because ransomware actors really like it. They are very interested in insider threat. The big problem is, at least for right now, even if you hate your company, you generally either hate ransomware actors more or just don't trust them, rightfully so that they're actually going to pay you for whatever they do. So we just don't see a lot of that right now. In fact, in the last couple of years, there are only 2 cases that I'm aware of. And it's been the same 2 cases for the last few years. So it doesn't seem to be, catching on anywhere. Once the ransomware or once the initial access broker has access and they install their tools, they then hand it off to the ransomware operator. And we see the same tools being used over and over again, whether it's AdFind or Bloodhound or Mimikatz, PowerSploit, Lasagna, Metasploit, etc., AdRecon. All of these tools that are here, these tend to be the tools that we see over and over again. Every now and then, we'll see something new used by a group, but that quickly gets added to the other groups. And that's good because if you build in detections for these tools, then you're much more likely to stop a ransomware operator because they will use the same tools over and over again as long as they keep working. So when we talk about how you go about doing threat hunting, right, we're trying to stop the ransomware attack as early in the attack chain as possible, ideally with initial access, which is hard, but not as hard as dealing with the recovery from a ransomware attack. And so basically what you're looking at is you want to take whatever intelligence you have about, like the chart on the previous page, intelligence around whatever it is that, whatever the threats are, however these ransomware operators, these initial access brokers are working, you want to use that to build threat hunting packages that look for expected badness, that look for the unusual things in your network. And then you want to refine those searches and incorporate them into your regular security workflow. So the first time you get a hit saying, hey, we see ransomware actors using this tool here. Here's a YAR rule. Here's a Sigma rule. Here's a detection rule of some sort. You're going to run that through your logs. You're going to look for that thing in your network. And you may try it and find a whole bunch of false positives, right? And that's good because you've gone through and detect that and realize, hey, this rule as written won't work for us. And so you want to refine that search so that you're delivering fewer false positives. Feed that back into your internal intelligence. Hey, on our network, we have to adjust the rule like this, and then turn that into part of your regular security workflow. And you're going to keep doing that as things change over time in your network, in your organization. You want to keep that cycle going of using intelligence, building threat packages, refining those threat packages, making sure that is something you're regularly checking for, and then updating as as the situation on your local network changes. That is how you operate threat hunting in as efficient a manner as possible. So, like anything else, threat hunting only works if you have a good understanding of your network. And what I mean by that is you need to have the basics covered. You need to have the basics covered. You need to have good asset management. You need to have to know what's in your network, not just all the systems, but what they're running, what the software is, etc. You need to have good asset management. You need to have good identity management. You need to know who is supposed to be in your network, where they're coming from, what machines are supposed to be talking to other machines in your network. All of those things need to be factored into this. So good identity management, and then finally good data management. You need to know where your data is, how it's being secured. And this is both locally and in the cloud. And then ideally, although it's a little harder to do that with threat hunting, ideally knowing where all your partners and your partners' partners have their data stored, because you're going to need to be able to track all of that. And so without the basics done, threat hunting isn't going to work. And that's true not just with threat hunting, that's true with any security thing. Black Hat was just a few weeks ago, and if you go out on the, if you go in the vendor area, there's all kinds of new whiz-bang cool tools that are out there. And, all of those tools, no matter how much they tell you they will make your job easier, all of them require that you have the basics covered. And so you want to do that first. Otherwise, you're building this on incomplete data, which means you are going to miss things. So one of the first things that I like to tell people when you're looking for kind of easy wins for detecting ransomware attackers in your network is most ransomware operators can't work if you have an EDR on the endpoint they land on. So if you've got a SentinelOne, if you've got a CrowdStrike, if you've got a Mandiant, whatever, if you have an EDR sitting on that endpoint, they can't work. So what they do is they kill that. They land on the box, and they've got scripts that they run that will kill that, whether it's using the AU kill or something else. If you see something like that, you should be alerting on it. And unfortunately, too often, I don't see organizations do that. Like, their EDR is killed by a third-party tool or by a PowerShell script, and they don't alert on that. That should be setting off all kinds of alarms in your SOC, because no third-party tool should be killing your endpoint. So that is one of these, like, I don't want to say quick, but it is one of these relatively easy wins compared to some of the other things that you can do to detect. If something is killing your endpoint protection, you should find out what it is, and you should respond to that. And then looking for the tools that initial access brokers use. So they've got to land in your network somehow. And if you're talking about protecting against phishing, you probably can't stop the phishing email. Phishing emails have gotten really good. They've gotten really sophisticated. There are a lot of great tools that try and stop it, but there's also a whole lot of phishing that gets through. But they all have some piece of malware or some kind of loader that they want to install. And SOC Ghoulish is a great example of that. It's a social engineering toolkit that is the payload for a lot of these phishing emails. So having a Yara rule in place, and again, you can generally feed these into your EDR, into your endpoint, looking for SOC Ghoulish is a great way to detect a phishing campaign that you might otherwise have missed. And there are a lot of these loaders out there that are used by these different phishing campaigns. Repeatedly, we see these different loaders pop up. And if you're detecting these kind of loaders, you can stop, even if whatever your protections you have in place for phishing, even if that email is missed, you can at least stop the loader from happening. And one of the things, so SOC Ghoulish, for example, compressed JavaScript file, that's not a normal attachment. For most organizations, you may be an exception if you do a lot of development work, etc. But looking for things like compressed attachments, especially scripts, and so they'll avoid detection by having them, by having them zipped up with a password. So you have to unzip this and put in this password. But in general, you should be looking for, hey, what is this compressed attachment, and treating any of those with suspicion. especially if they require a password, if they're password blocked. PowerShell is another big one. Every ransomware attack that I've responded to has used PowerShell in one way or another. And so one of the best ways to detect PowerShell is through enabling PowerShell logging. Because there are a lot of things that you can look for that ransomware actors have to do that they use PowerShell for and can help detect it. Now, the problem, of course, with PowerShell logging is it can be very noisy. And so a lot of people don't want to turn on PowerShell logging because, frankly, they're already overwhelmed with logs and they don't want to add more to it. So what you want to do again is threat hunt through the PowerShell logs and look for specific things that are unusual. Disabling admin accounts is a big one. Creating new admin accounts. Looking for new scripts that haven't been previously run or scripts running at odd times. And there are probably other things that are specific to your network because everybody has a baseline PowerShell operation and you're looking for things that are outside the norm of your baseline PowerShell operation. However you use PowerShell in your network, you're looking for things that run outside that norm. And so again, we went back to, we go back to what we talked about in the beginning, having that baseline understanding of your network. This is the same thing. To do effective threat hunting in PowerShell, you need to have a baseline understanding of how your PowerShell operates. Who is using PowerShell in your network? When are they using it? How are they using it? How often are those scripts updated? If you have a fairly static PowerShell presence in your network, that's great. Because then basically anything that's an oddity, anything that's not your baseline, that should be investigated. That makes your job so much easier when you're talking about threat hunting. And so PowerShell logging works a lot better with Sysmon because it improves your visibility and it's much more configurable. Swift on Security has some really good stuff on her GitHub archive. I would take a look at that, and especially some of the unique Sysmon event IDs that you can tag on. But again, the other thing that you can do is simply look for things that are outside of your baseline, and then those are the things that you that you alert on and you start investigating. And again, going back to that cycle of how you do threat hunting, if you find something that looks suspicious, turns out it's not, add that into your rotation so that you're not alerting on that constantly, and then continue to look for new and interesting things. Looking for GUIs. Most ransomware operators don't like to use the command line, but they have to get from machine to machine in your network. So some will use PSExec. That's another tool that if you don't commonly use it in your network, you should be looking for signs that that's being used. But for the others, what they're going to do is they're going to download a remote management and monitoring tool so that they can connect from one machine to the next using a GUI. So Screen Connect, Altera, AnyDesk, Splashtop, any of these remote management and monitoring GUI products are things that you can be looking for. Again, if you've got SentinelOne or another EDR in your network, looking for this activity can be really valuable, especially if these are tools that your employees shouldn't be using. So if these are things that you've set up, if you've said, hey, the only thing we can use for remote management and monitoring is remote desktop protocol. We want Microsoft's. Any other RMM that you see in your network should be an alert, should be something that, hey, we should investigate this. And the nice thing about these is that they are not meant to be hidden. So a lot of the other tools that we've talked about, whether you're talking about Mimikatz or AdFind or many of these others, are red teaming tools that are designed to run in memory, designed to hide and avoid detection. So they're much harder to detect. These are easy. You load the hashes in for the latest versions of the software, and if you detect any of those, that's an alert. You can't run these in memory. They're not easy to hide, and they're not meant to be hidden. So that's, again, sort of a canary of indicating that there may be some sort of malicious activity in the network. Cobalt Strike is another big one. So we consistently see Cobalt Strike and Brute Ratel used for C2 communications. And again, Cobalt Strike's another one of those that is hard to detect because it is a red teaming tool. It is meant to avoid detection. And so it can be hard to find, but there are some tricks here and there that you can use. You can do the basics. Look for file hashes associated with that, but you may not detect those if they're operating in memory. Check with your EDR vendor to see whether or not they can pull file hashes out of memory and see if that works. But there are other things that you can do, like looking for their named pipes. So again, going back to having Sysmon running in your network, that allows you to search for certain named pipes. And Cobalt Strike has a specific formatting for that it uses repeatedly, MSSE -4-digit number -server. And you can look for event ID 17, pipe created, and 18, pipe connected for these alerts. Now, this is configurable. This can be changed. Thing is, most ransomware operators don't do it. They don't have to because people aren't detecting at that level. So if you are looking at this, if you're using Sysmon to capture these event IDs, you may be able to detect this activity. Again, and we're talking about very, very early on in the attack. And that's good. The earlier we can stop these, the better. And so far, the kind of the things that we're talking about, we're not talking about having to buy new tools, buy new software. If you have an EDR and you have a SIM, you can do all of these things. It's more work, it's more configuration, but it can be done without having to spend more money, which is great. Other than your very, very valuable and I'm sure very limited time. I've talked about AdFind. AdFind is a tool that's used by many, many ransomware groups once they're on the network to enumerate your Active Directory and find users and passwords that they can that they can use to gain access to Active Directory. It's adopted by at least a half dozen, if not more, ransomware groups at this point. It's free and it's relatively easy to operate and produces a lot of information. But again, it can be detectable. So if you've got an EDR or you've got a SIM, you can run through you can run a Sigma rule through that looks for AdFind activity, that it's what it's trying to do and how it's trying to work. So so that is this is what this looks like, or it's part of the Sigma rule for finding AdFind. It's looking for the type of traffic that it has, and again, you can feed that into your SIM as a way of looking for this activity, because there are certain things that AdFind has to do to enumerate. Data transfer. So data exfiltration is an increasingly important part of ransomware groups. Like I said, for some, it's the only thing that they do. So are you looking for large data transfers at odd hours? Generally, ransomware groups are not subtle about getting the data exfiltrated from your network. They want to get as much data out of the network as quickly as possible. And so that's kind of what we see. So looking for sudden large transfers, especially after hours, that may be a sign of a ransomware operation. They also love Mega.io. So Mega.io is a company out of New Zealand that is great for large file transfers. They're relatively cheap, and they take Bitcoin for people who sign up for paid accounts, which means that the ransomware operators really like them because they can shove a whole bunch of data out of the network. And so Mega.io, Mega.nz, all of the domains associated with Mega.io, if it's not an authorized vendor in your network, might as well block it. And then alert anytime somebody does try and upload a bunch of files to there so that you can investigate. And then look at the tools that the ransomware operators like to use for data transfers. rclone is really popular. 7-zip, megasync, all of these data transfer tools, looking for those, building YARA rules to feed into your EDR and detect that activity. Now, again, you have to be careful because you may be using some of these inside the network and you don't want to get a bunch of false positives, but anything that is not commonly used in your network, hopefully you can build a YARA rule, feed it into your EDR, and look for that type of malicious activity. And then shadow copy deletion. The last thing that most ransomware operators do before they actually run the ransomware is delete shadow copy files. This is one of those that I really don't like as an advice. I mean, you can detect the activity. Absolutely. You can build a Sigma rule detected in your, this activity in your SIM. That's nice. The problem is it's basically too late. By the time you get the alert that somebody has started deleting shadow copies on your machines, you already know you have a ransomware attack because, let's be honest, most of the time from alert from when the log is generated to when the analyst gets the alert is 15, 20 minutes, sometimes longer. And if you are waiting for that alert, you're probably already aware that things are getting encrypted. You've already started getting calls from people in the network saying, hey, I can't use my computer. So this isn't a great option, but it's still an option you can throw in there just in case. If you are much more streamlined, if your configuration is tighter, you might be able to avoid this and respond a lot faster before the ransomware attack can cause a lot of damage. So those are some of the tips that we have for ways to look for malicious activity in your network, and there are ways for detecting activity without necessarily having to go out and get a new thing or a new gizmo or gadget or whatever to keep you safe. But it provides a sort of an effective baseline. And going back to what I said early on, all of this depends very much on you having a good baseline and good understanding of what's happening in your network. Once you've done that, then you can overlay the threat hunting or whatever other types of security process you want on top of that. And as always, I thank you very much for your time. I'm really looking forward to the discussion that follows, because that's always my favorite part of this event is the great questions we get and the great conversations that we have. So thanks again, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. And Allan, great presentation as always. And you always spark a bunch of thoughts. One of them, I just wanted to pop back to this slide about dwell time, because this was really eye-opening for me. And it made something snap into focus for me. You see a lot of conflicting numbers about average dwell times. The numbers seem to range from, minutes to weeks. And I think your graphic finally clarified part of what's going on there for me, which is there are some handoffs in there that can add a lot of time to the process. So, it seems like this almost suggests that organizations have a little more time to effectively deal with, exploitation than some of the shorter time frames indicate. Certainly you want to be on top of it as fast as possible, but it's not like throw your hands up and give up just because maybe somebody has compromised your network. You've got some time if they're in one of these ecosystems where they're selling from the initial access broker to the ransomware actor. You've got some time to sort of shut it down before the ransomware actor gets in there and gets their act together on it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. So, again, when we talk about an ecosystem, we're talking about a traditional bartering type ecosystem. So even if you're the most desirable network, so you landed in one of the biggest networks in the world, you have admin access to it, and you can then go sell that for $20,000 to a ransomware operator. There's an escrow process in that. Like, that's how sophisticated these forums are. They're gonna the bad guy's gonna send money, or they're all bad guys. The ransomware operator is going to send the money. That's going to sit in escrow while they test out the credentials, and that escrow process can take 2 or 3 days. And then once they've confirmed it, they're going to let the money out of escrow, and the person's going to have it. So, like, even in the best case scenario, there's generally 2 or 3 days for that transaction to take place, which I think is really fascinating when you think about it. Because, yeah, I mean, it's like when you buy a house, you put the money in escrow, and then once you confirm that you've taken hold of the house, then the money comes out of escrow.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting detail about escrow. I mean, we've been hearing about like the business sophistication of these groups for 10 years, but it's always surprising. When you hear about just the regular business processes that they're going through.
What's funny though, the sophistication is only to a point. And this is a little bit of a tangent. So every time the law enforcement takes down one of these bad guys, like with the Lockbit takedown, they find a bunch of crypto wallets sitting on the servers, because the bad guys are really good at getting you to give them money, and they're really good at mixing the money. So running it through crypto exchanges to kind of hide where it comes from. But they haven't figured out the last part of how to launder the money. So they're literally, other than, they may use it to buy a car or to get some basic cash using like a Bitcoin ATM. They haven't figured out how to turn that into more money for them. So like if you run a drug cartel, you open a restaurant or you get a laundromat or a mattress store or something like that, somewhere where you can start, literally laundering the money. The bad guys haven't figured that out yet, and so all of their money sits in these crypto wallets. So, like, their sophistication is great up until a point, and then it stops. Now, I'm sure part of that is it's really hard to open a new mattress store in downtown Moscow. So your laundering capabilities are somewhat limited, but it is interesting to see where the sophistication ends.
Well, that's interesting too, because I thought part of the thing with like Russia was that it was sort of open season as long as you're attacking people outside of Russia, or at least the former Eastern Bloc. But are there still like hurdles that they have to get past to sort of hide it, with the wink and nod situation over there?
Yeah. So one of the things in 2022, the Russian the Russian equivalent of the Federal Reserve has basically said they don't want cryptocurrency in the country, and so that makes it harder to move cryptocurrency within the country. Now, just this week, that same bank said, you know what? Our economy is hurting because of all the sanctions, so open season for cryptocurrency. So we may start to see that change now that Russia has said, oh, yeah, no, cryptocurrency is cool now. Because, it's the same thing North Korea does, right? That's how North Korea avoids all the sanction, is they steal cryptocurrency from everywhere and they use cryptocurrency to pay for things. And so Russia may be changing that model, which may allow these ransomware groups to move that money a little easier. But the ones based in Russia have had trouble because the Russian central bank doesn't want, or until this week, didn't want cryptocurrency in the country.
Gotcha. And you're talking about, laundering money. One of my favorite stories ever was a local news report about some sub shop that, the mafia was using to launder money. And they interviewed some customer who was just like, or to launder money and maybe sell drugs as well, in the sub packages. And some customer was interviewed, was like, oh, I just really like the subs. They've been coming to this front for years and enjoyed the subs, and it wasn't even their business.
It is. I guess even when it's a laundering front, you can still make good subs. Who knew?
We had a question here from Jeff, who's wondering, what are some best practices to train employees in advance of such attacks?
It's hard, right? Because no matter how much training you get, the realities of your business will set in. So we do that at Recorded Future, the company that I work for. We do constant training for people on things to look for signs of phishing emails, etc. That doesn't change the fact that at the end of the quarter, when you're working 15-hour days trying to get everything processed, you're much more likely to make a mistake. So what I tell people is be aware of who the sender is, although that doesn't always work, but be aware of who the sender is. Be aware of anything that is an attachment, I know we're going to talk about this more in the next webinar that we do, but really you want to get people to hone their spidey sense in terms of, if this looks funny, let us know. But the other end of that is you have to respond quickly, right? Like you have to, if somebody forwards an email and says, hey, I think this is weird, they may not have 24 hours for you to get back to them. So you also have to be able to say, yeah, you know what, let's take a look, and you were right, good job, or no, this looks okay, go ahead and do what you need to do. So that combination of building that trust with the rest of the employees so that they know that, hey, if anything weird pops up, they can send it to you and they're going to get a quick response. I think for us, that's been the most effective part, is knowing that, oh yeah, if I have any suspicion at all, it's not going to disrupt my business process too long doing this.
Okay. All right. Excellent. And Jeff, thanks for that question. We have one here from Aditya, which is a kind of an old chestnut here. What are the pros and cons of paying the ransom, and what should organizations consider before making this decision? Obviously, we've talked about this a lot of times. Anything new coming into that calculus these days?
So the biggest new thing to think about is more and more criminal organizations are getting sanctioned by governments now. Before, your calculus was largely, if I pay, I'm helping the bad guys get better, and that stinks, but I get my business back up and running faster. Now you may be running afoul of the law if you pay, because it used to be, if you paid a ransomware actor who was working for North Korea, that was bad. You were going to get sanctioned. But if it was a Russian cyber criminal, you weren't going to. Now more and more of those cyber criminals are also sanctioned. And so you've got to be really careful about who you're paying. Make sure you're talking to your insurance company. Make sure you're talking to your legal department. And hell, reach out to your local FBI agent or your local or FBI office or whatever, because they can check the OFAC list. And in the U.S., they can check the OFAC list and make sure that it's not a sanctioned entity, because paying a sanctioned entity can get you some serious fines.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Let's see. Adam was agreeing with you that Screen Connect is a common one to look out for. There was a question from Jeffrey about, could implementing multiple security controls such as EDR or application whitelisting solutions to prevent apps or PowerShells being exploited?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the application control is a great process, but again, it's a complex process. If your organization is set up so that you can run an EDR effectively and also have application control in place, fantastic. That is going to make your life a lot easier. Most organizations aren't that mature and don't have that level of control over the desktop, because there are too many different, even in a small organization, there are too many different departments with too many different software needs, etc. And so keeping track of all of that is important. We're, again, something that we've done internally at Recorded Future is reining in the allowed applications, what's allowed to run and what isn't, and having a control process before new applications are started. But if you don't have that now, starting that is really hard. But if you can do that, yes, because then you can prevent all of these things that the bad guys use from ever running in the first place on your network.
Okay. All right. Excellent. One little aside question. You mentioned in your presentation about the GUIs. What do ransomware groups have against the command line?
They're a bunch of dumb millennials. Back when you and I did hacking, we had to do the command line old school. But millennials with their iPads and their iPhones, they can't use the command line anymore. Honestly,
I am distancing myself from that comment. I have nothing against that.
I know everybody. Yeah, I know. I'm about to be on a list somewhere. No, I mean, it's just that it's easier. And, running things from the command line is hard. Running things in a window that looks like your Windows window is a lot easier. So, I mean, that's the whole point.
Gotcha. Hey, Paul has a great question, something that's really coming up more and more. He's wondering, are automated and AI-assisted processes and malware accelerating the dwell time, therefore reducing the possible intervention window?
So, yes and no. We're definitely seeing we see AI being used by some of the malware groups, absolutely, some of the cyber criminal groups, but we tend to see it on the other end. And what I mean by that is if I'm writing phishing emails and I'm trying to avoid detection, using AI and feeding them a subject line for a phishing email will allow me to create a lot more phishing emails that are different enough that they're not going to get flagged as phishing or spam emails. And so we see it from there. We do see AI being used for some tool development, but it's really hard because of the specialized nature of building these sort of malware tools. It's really hard to have the whole thing written in AI and be more efficient, but they are, for different components of it, they're absolutely using AI for that. So I think we see it more on the front end, not on the operation end, not once they're in the network. It is certainly something to look for. We're constantly monitoring for new uses of AI by these different groups. And so the answer that I give today may change 6 months from now.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Hey, another great question from Jeffrey is wondering, how often do living off the land attacks get overlooked? I think you mentioned a couple of, I guess PowerShell could probably considered living off the land. Maybe a couple others of those attacks that you mentioned, but I mean, those are really more difficult to detect because you've got to separate it from the usual activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there are some ransomware groups that rely heavily on living off the land. So a lot of the ransomware groups out of Iran use living off the land. So they're using PSExec, they're using net, they're using kind of all of these Windows command tools. What's interesting that I like is there's a company called Thinkst Canary. And they have and what they do is they have what they call canaries. It's little bits of code that you can install in the registry, and it detects different activity in the network. And they have one for living off the land because basically the same 5 or 6 commands are used by attackers, whether it's a nation state, a ransomware actor, initial access broker, whatever. They have to run basically the same five or 6 commands. And so what these canaries do is they live in your registry, and when those 5 commands are run, or some subset of those 5 commands are run, it sends an alert. And I've actually found that to be pretty effective. Now, would I install that in a network with 100,000 machines? No. But if I have a couple hundred machines or even a couple thousand machines in the network, I'd absolutely consider something like that because that's a great early way to detect it. Again, using Sysmon, you can do the same thing. It's a little more difficult, but you want to build some sort of threshold for these kind of subset of commands as a way of detecting it. And they do. They're much, much harder to detect because it's not going to set off a lot of the traditional tools.
Yeah. Hey, another question here from Aditya is probably the last question we've got time for, but it's a good one. What are some resources that you as an expert refer to so that you're up to date with the current events in sort of these ever-changing attack patterns?
So one of my favorites is DFIR report. That's D as in dog, F as in Frank, I as in igloo, R as in Robert report. And they have a bunch of honeypots set up all over, and they basically map out the attack as it happens. So from the initial access broker getting in to the ransomware being deployed, they kind of monitor the whole thing, and they can then provide you with the tools that were used, how they were used, what commands were run, etc. And that's a really good resource to pull down and grab and understand how the attack's working. I also CrowdStrike does some really good blogs. SentinelOne does some really good blogs. Mandiant does some really good blogs of kind of everything they've seen. And then CISA has also gotten really good at releasing kind of broad reports for different ransomware groups, including the tools used and the commands run. So I reference those all the time as ways of getting the information. I think DFIR report specifically is the where you get the data the fastest, but any of these companies have really good and really detailed reports for things you should be looking for.
Okay, excellent. In sort of a follow up on that question, before we close here, how many organizations rely really on their tool vendors to keep up with that stuff versus having people internally who are trying to keep up with it and update their their rules in the SIM and stuff like that.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think most wind up with their tool vendors doing that. It's hard if you are being pulled away. It's hard to get away to do research when you have 50 tickets in your queue, right? As much as tomorrow I'm going to be at B-Sides Nova here in Northern Virginia presenting, and there's going to be a bunch of great talks all day. And I can do that because it's a Saturday. If it's during the week, I can't, it's hard for me to spend a whole day at a conference. That's why things like this are really useful. And I always try and provide hopefully really relevant and important information for people because, this hour of your time for so many people is hard to give up. And you want to make sure that you're getting that information out there. But I think so many organizations are relying on their vendors to give them the most up-to-date information. And even then, I don't think they often do that. Like, one of the things that I think is really important is to have an annual, at least annual, if not more often, sit down with all of your vendors and say, hey, what are your new detection capabilities? How are they being implemented? How do I know that I've got sort of the latest updates in what you're doing, and sort of getting a state of the world from them and getting a free lunch out of it? Nobody ever minds a free lunch. But I do think, if you're in that case where you're a small team and you're overwhelmed and you can't get out and do all of this research on your own, at least having your vendors come in and talk to you during the workday can be really helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, and I want to thank Jeffrey for posting in the Q&A chat there about CISA as a resource, and you put in the name of Thinkst Canary, which you mentioned, Allan. And then I just popped in DFIR for DFIR report. So 3 great references that Allan made here that you can follow up with, everybody. Well, Allan, I think that's a good place to leave it. Always, I could talk to you for another hour, on these things, but we got to close in about 60 minutes. So thank you so much for taking your time and letting us know what you're seeing out there. Really, really appreciate it.
No problem. It's always great to talk to you all, and thanks everybody for the fantastic questions. And Scott, I will talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Allan. Okay, and before we wrap up, we do have that one more piece of business. That's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that $250 Amazon gift card today is Cedric Mendiola from Minnesota. So congratulations to Cedric. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for all of your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day and a great weekend. Oh, one other thing I should mention. We have coming up next week the AI Impact Future of IT Tech and Cybersecurity event. And that is next Tuesday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. It's brought to you by Future B2B. Sponsored by Cloudflare and SentinelOne. It's going to be a great event. AI came up a little bit today. AI and cybersecurity. That's certainly going to be one of the topics there. Something to check out. Okay. With that, now have a great rest of your day and a fantastic weekend. Take care.